Okay, so now that we've set up our Java environment and we know how to write and run our program, it's time we learn basic programming concepts so we know what to write. So one of the most basic but important concepts in most programming languages are variables and data types. Now, in computer science, you deal with data a lot. For example, when you sign up for a Google account, it stores your information like your name and your age in Google servers. And if you wanted to make a game that starts by asking the player for their age and then it uses that somewhere later on, you would need a way to store that player's age in your program. So this is where you'd use a variable. In your code, you can create variables to store information that can be used later on. There are 5 important types of data in Java: integers, doubles, booleans, characters, and strings. There are a few more, but they're less common, so these are the 5 that we'll be going over. Now the integer is basically like an integer in math. It stores whole number values. So an example would be if you wanted to store someone's age in your program. And age cannot be like 14.3, it's generally either 14, 15, 16, 25. So that would be an example of something you'd store as an integer. Another example would be the number of cars. You can't have 14.5 cars, so you would use an integer for storing something like that. So example integer values could be 5 or negative 127 or 840, or just a big number that doesn't have a decimal. Now I'll show you an example of how you would code an integer in Java. So you would start off with the keyword int, and this is telling Java that you want to create that integer variable. And then after that, you put the name of your variable, and this should be a reasonable name. It doesn't really matter that much what it is because it doesn't matter to Java, it just matters to you as the programmer because it should be clear and you should know what it means. So if we wanted to store someone's age, one reasonable name would be age. And then we need to set age to be equal to a certain value. So we would set the equal sign, and then we can say 20. And one thing in Java is that every statement ends with a semicolon. So remember to put that semicolon. So now we've officially written one line of code. We create our integer variable using the keyword int. We give it a name, and this name could be anything. So I could name this age of player, and that would still work. It's just for me. So age, and then we set it equal to 20. Now, this Java keyword means that you have to write it exactly like this. So you couldn't write integer here, or you couldn't write int with a capital I. Well, it would be wrong, and because Java is case sensitive, so you need to write int. Okay. So the next data type is double, which is also a number, but it stores numbers with a decimal point. So examples of double variables might be your weight if you're storing like 105.3, maybe your height or your percentage grade in school. These are examples of values that could be represented as doubles. Now, some double values could be like 5.7 or negative 0.9 or this long number. Or it could even be something like 10.0. Now 10.0 could be represented as an integer because it's just 10, but as long as there's a decimal like 0.0, it is considered a double. So if we were to code a double, we would use the keyword double, and same thing as last time, now we need the name. So let's say we're storing weight. And then we have our equal sign, and we set it equal to some value, so 106.9. And as always, we need our semicolon, and so now we've created our double variable, which will be equal to 106.9. And same as integer, you can't make this a capital D, at least in this scenario. There is a more advanced concept called wrapper classes, but we'll get into that. So make sure you start with a lowercase, and you write it exactly like this. So the next data type is Boolean, and Boolean, unlike int and double, where you could have basically an infinite number of values like 1, 2, 3, and so on until like 10,000, a Boolean can only store 2 different values, and that is true or false. And so you can think of it like a yes or a no. Is it raining outside? True or false? Yes or no? Is someone a girl? True or false? Yes or no? So Booleans can really only be 2 things, and they're generally associated with questions which only have 2 options. So if we were to code a Boolean variable, we would start with the keyword, which is Boolean, and I'll say is child. So it's kind of saying, is the value a child? So if you were storing the information of a person, of the player, in your game, then is child, let's say they are a child, then we would set this equal to true. And then if they were not, then we would just say false. And we can't set this equal to anything else. It's only true or false. So that is Booleans. You might have noticed something here. I said is, and then with the capital C I put child. So in Java, there are naming conventions for variables. So you know that variable names can get long at some point. So if we wanted to have age of player like that, this is kind of hard to read, right? Because in Java you can't have spaces between your variables. So it's just, this would be wrong if you were to put in space, then it would read this as two separate things. So your Java variables always need to be one word. So the way to differentiate between the words is that you use something called camel case, where the first word is always lowercase, and every word after that starts with a capital letter. And you can see here that this is much easier to read than that. And it gets more clear later on when you have more variables and bigger variable names, that using camel case is easier. Now this is just a convention in Java. Some other programming languages use underscores like this, but if you're going to be using Java, then it's good to get used to this camel case. Okay, so the next data type is string, and this might be the most common data type that you use because it basically just stores text and is surrounded by quotation marks. So some examples would be things like name, or birthday, or address, or email. Really, most types of information are strings. So example values could be hello, or Jimmy, or 15, or true. Now you might notice here that this 15 is a number, but it is surrounded by double quotation marks, which automatically makes it a string. And the same thing applies for this true here. You might think, okay, true is a Boolean variable, a Boolean value, but it's surrounded by double quotes, meaning it's a string. So if we were to code a string, we'll start off with the keyword, which is string, and then we would have the name once again, so we'll say name here, and then we set it equal to something, so I can say John. Now you might notice something different, which is that this string, the capital S is capital, sorry, obviously it's capital, but the first letter is capital. And unlike int and double and Boolean, this is a capital letter. And there is a reason for this, but it's more of an advanced concept. But you should just know for now that string starts with capital. And if you were to use a lowercase, then it would not work, and your editor would give you some sort of error. Okay, and so as always, we have our semicolon, and we put whatever value we want in the quotes. Next up, we have characters, or chars. And these store a single character, like one letter, or a punctuation mark, or a symbol, or a first initial. Now these probably are the least common out of the 5, but you'll still see them, so it's good to know. Example values would be things like the letter A, or the letter F, or even 5, like I said. As long as it's surrounded by a quote, then it's not really an integer. And then this @ symbol. So if we were to code a character, then we would use char, and then we would have the name, so first initial, and let's say we were to do J. Now you might notice that this looks kind of similar to a string, but the one thing that differentiates between a character and a string is a single versus double quote. So as long as it's a single quote, it is a character, and if it's a double quote, it's a string.